And we're back. So we're going to continue our discussion of corporate social responsibility. Now, corporate social responsibility historically in the U.S. didn't exist as corporate social responsibility, but rather as a form of charity. So the great, as they called them, robber barons, believed in giving back to people, but only as individuals. Individual presidents of these corporations gave from their own personal money. Okay, that's no different than you or me going to a charity event and giving money. Okay, the same kind of principle. It didn't come from corporate treasury. Let me give some examples. Andrew Carnegie gave away more than $300 million during his lifetime to social causes. Rockefeller gave away almost $500 million over the course of his lifetime. Stephen Girard gave $6 million for a school to educate orphan boys. Okay? Cornelius Vanderbilt founded Vanderbilt University. And of course, this charitable impulse, it may seem that was kind of an early thing, but it still exists today. When you think about someone like Lex Wexner donating all that money to Ohio State University, or Oprah starting that school in South Africa for orphans. So but it is funds given from their personal bank accounts, not from the corporate treasuries. Okay? And it was generally a reflection that these wealthy people had been blessed, and so they had some sort of responsibility to give back to communities. Now, some people actually frowned on that giving away of money, especially people that were advocates of social Darwinism. Remember, we talked about social Darwinism a little bit earlier. Social Darwinism is that general idea that survival of the fittest in social settings. So those that were rich were deemed to be in some way better. They were smarter, morally superior, etc. And dominant companies were also morally superior to those others. So you didn't really have responsibilities to your stakeholders. It was really almost a dominance model view of the world, not necessarily corporate social responsibility. And one of the most famous thinkers of this tradition is Thomas Malthus. Now, Malthus, in addition to being a philosopher, was a priest, which is very surprising to me. Advocated that you not even pay factory workers really much more than a living wage, because what happens if they have too much money? They reproduce like a bunch of rats, and then they starve to death, and they have what they call a Malthusian population breakdown, where people all start dying of starvation and disease. So we actually advocate not taking care of workers. Okay? Weird idea, right? Now, during the Progressive era, social responsibility began to take off a little bit more. Remember, we talked about the Progressive era a couple lectures back during business history. But some different themes came across during the Progressive era. One was that managers were trustees. Managers were trustees, meaning that managers had some sort of responsibility to ethically manage the corporation on behalf of the owners. Managers, of course, had an obligation to balance multiple interests. That sounds a lot like the stakeholder model, doesn't it? And then, of course, managers also have to subscribe to the service principle. Another idea that also arose during the Progressive era was the idea that government had had a responsibility to make sure that corporations behave in a moral or ethical way. And of course, companies could solve social ills kind of hand in hand with the government. Of course, again, as I mentioned, before, Henry Ford was another one who advocated his own version of corporate social responsibility in addition to General Robert Wood. And again, he believed in responsibility to customers, the public employees, suppliers, and finally, stockholders. Again, you're looking at basically versions of the stakeholder model. Now, some social organizations began to arise in the late 19th and 20th centuries. Of course, some had already existed previously. You had people like the Masons, you had various churches. They engaged in a lot of these functions when business and government had failed to provide those services normally. Other organizations started. Anybody ever play Monopoly? But you think about the community chest. That was an organization that helped out people. Of course, the Red Cross. They did a lot of work. And of course, organizations like the Boy Scouts. These were all kind of social impulses to promote a broader theme of social responsibility. Now, starting in the 1950s, there began to be a lot of critiques of corporate social responsibility because the idea, and we're going to compare this to creating shared value when we're meeting class, generally speaking, corporate social responsibility projects do not contribute to the overall wealth of the firm itself. So that's generally seen as a bad thing. And so people will actually advocate against corporate social responsibility. It's generally portrayed as something that started in the 50s, but it still exists even today. Let's see. So I think that wraps up this portion of the history of corporate social responsibility. We'll continue in just a minute with some general principles of corporate social responsibility.